Let's welcome Eric Cantor, the former House Majority Leader who is now Vice Chairman and Managing Director with Moelis Company. Were you in on that last conversation, Eric? And how do you think? What do you think is going on behind the scenes right now, in your view?
Yeah, well, good morning, Joe. Listen, you got a couple things that are sort of in place, and I think you heard Neil Kashkari say this earlier on behalf of the Fed, that they are going to err on the side of overreacting in a crisis situation like this. And I think you've got some things in place that will make it so that the Capitol Hill will also respond in a way. Number one, I think there isn't anyone now who doesn't understand the disaster that this could potentially be from a human life standpoint and certainly from an economic standpoint. So that's number one. Number two, you have divided government, right? And so anytime you've got divided government, the spending restraint mechanisms that are typically in place, at least when my party used to be about focused on fiscal discipline, I think all bets are off. And then thirdly, this, as I think Becky had pointed out earlier, this is sort of eerily similar, but not exactly like either 9/11 or like 08 or 09, both of which I served in Congress. I mean, because you have an exogenous event, just like 9/11 wasn't created by anyone, so it's no one's fault. So the blame game can't start right now. But yeah, you have, and the problem is starting out with the small and medium-sized businesses, because that's where I think the real challenge is going to be. And now all of that from those businesses, the large businesses, are placing stress on the banking and the financial markets. So all of this, I think, points to the fact that you're going to see massive action on the part of government.
And go ahead, Andrew.
Eric, I was just going to ask what you think, and maybe I'm trying to think too long-term about this, but what you think the political implications of all this are ultimately going to be. Because we are going from crisis to crisis. We don't have a rainy day kitty, a rainy day fund at all. That's clear as day. Every time we have a crisis, we're willing to throw as much money at it as possible. When we're in good times, we seem to not try to do much about it. And I just wonder whether this is going to change the political landscape in terms of how we think about these types of fundings.
Listen, I think there is going to be huge political repercussions at some point down the line. I'm not sure that there's going to be anywhere near a majority of members of Congress who are going to actually think about sort of the fiscal aspects of this, given the amount of debt that's been amassed over the last, decade plus in this country. And I think at some point that certainly will arise again as a political issue. Right now, I want to stress again, I think that most people want to make sure that the employees at a hotel or at a coffee shop or a florist who now all of a sudden find themselves out of work, that they get the assistance in the same way that we're talking about the big companies, the airlines, the banks, and others who, as you rightly pointed out earlier, Andrew, have engaged in share buybacks and the rest, and there's going to be finger pointing along those lines if you don't help the individual as well as the small and medium-sized businesses.
Eric, as far as the divided government you just alluded to, would you say that Mnuchin talking to Nancy Pelosi for 13 different times and coming together, does that portend that we're going to be, at least while the crisis is front and center, that we're going to have some cooperation and we'll end up doing the right thing like we did with TARP, and that we can count on policymakers to put aside their differences for at least a while?
Well, listen, it's always at a time of crisis that I think Washington in the end will actually step up and act. And then I think history will then be able to look back to say whether it was the right thing or not. I do think that there is an urgency here and that everyone is aware of the situation that no one caused, that we're all now reacting to. So I do think, and I look at that number that's being talked about that Eamon just discussed, about $850 billion. You remember the stimulus package post '08 when Obama first came into office, it was about that size. Obviously, the economy's bigger, and again, this is a different situation. In a way, you think about the '08-'09 crisis that started. It was generated out of the financial system and the capital markets, and it started sort of inward and went outward. This one, much like, or at least similar to 9/11, the impact is being felt across the country now in all the business establishments, big and large. Big and small. So the real challenge is going to be what's the delivery or distribution mechanism for aid to small and medium-sized businesses? Because I think, Andrew, you may have said earlier, well, we should just rely on the banks and let them push out the money. And that means, are you going to allow the community banks across the country and anybody who steps up to, say, let's push out the money? Well, again, there's not a lot of controls there, and there could be a large potential for abuse in a system like that. Those are the kind of questions, Joe, I think you're still going to have when the policymakers, the politicians are trying to affect a positive result here in a very, very tense time.